So we're here today. We want to talk about the great Charlie Parker, who would have been 100 years old if he were alive today. He's very much with us in spirit. I think he has been for the last number of years. Huge influence in music. I think one of the most important musicians, arguably the most important musician in jazz music, improvised music. Uh, 20th century, and we're incredibly fortunate to have also uh, Gary Bartz with us today, who has been at the forefront of music for the last 55 years at least. He's worked with so many of the major voices in music over the last 55 years. And there's a direct link to Charlie Parker. I mean, in terms of influence, Charlie Parker's influence on Gary and so many other people, but also Gary's relationships with so many musicians who were directly involved with playing music with Charlie Parker. So, Gary has had associations with people like Max Roach, Miles Davis, Charles Mingus, Jackie McLean, a number of players from the bop era, going on to a very long association with the great Mccoy Tyner, and just numerous recordings of his own dating back to the mid 60s. One of the great voices in music today, Mr. Gary Bartz. So, Gary, I'd like to welcome you. It's really a pleasure and an honor to have you here. So, welcome.
Thank you, Kirk. That was very gracious introduction.
Okay, so I'm just trying to get the volume straightened out here.
I need to speak up, right?
That sounds good.
Okay.
Beautiful. Okay, so I suppose a good place to start, Gary, is maybe you could talk about Charlie Parker's influence on you. I guess just getting into the saxophone, just a little bit of brief history, and how his music has affected you and helped you develop over the years.
Well, basically, give me a reason to live. Because when I discovered his music, and I say his music, when I discovered him, it's no one's music. Um, and we all own music. No one can own music. But anyway, when I discovered Charlie Parker and his sound, started me on a journey, a lifetime journey that has not ended. That's why I say it gave me a reason to live, because in my darkest days, I can always go back there, and that kind of brings me out of.
Okay. Um, can you talk about you've worked with so many contemporaries of his, and I suppose most of those associations started in your early days in New York. People like Art Blakey, Max Roach, later on Miles, but Jackie McLean was somebody who was a contemporary of Bird's. I'm wondering if you could talk about the importance of those musicians in your development, and do you feel there were elements of what they brought to music that was specifically coming from their musical relationships with Bird and that kind of thing? I suppose all of these musicians had different elements of his musicality and conception that they brought to it. But do you have any feelings on that you could possibly share?
Well, we were apart, and when I say we, I mean all of us living at a certain age were a part of a evolution and innovation, an innovative period in music where music had reached a peak that it had never reached before. And there have been other times in history where that has happened, like when Beethoven around his time, he was an innovator, and Mozart, another Bach, they were all innovators. But one of the things I learned from Charlie Parker is that it's about the study of music. Um, I understand he always had a Bach um, exercise or you know etude book in his case, and in studying him, I see what he was seeing, and what he was seeing is music. And what we are seeing today are names, people trying to name music. You can't name music. Music is music. And so that's one of the things I learned from him. When I was young, I didn't listen to symphonic music. I didn't listen to the Beethovens, the Mozarts. So when I enrolled in Juilliard when I was 17, I wanted to learn what we would call in bebop. I just want to learn some bebop. And so Juilliard at that time was a European classical curriculum, and still is. And I find that really appalling, because the greatest music that has ever been created on this planet happened in this country, and they don't recognize it. They recognize a music from another country over the music that was developed by American citizens, brought here, mind you, from another country, to be enslaved, and immigrants that came here for other reasons, trying to escape. So Charlie Parker taught me all of this, you know, because I met Max Roach, and Max was definitely very, uh, he mentored me in the real history, in the true history, because I think we've lost touch with reality. Almost the whole world has, and many people have lost touch with reality, but that's a whole nother story. But music, and especially music that is being composed on the spot with a group of people. See, Mozart and Beethoven and Bach, they all did it. Every virtuoso if you're a virtuoso on your instrument, you can just start playing anything and sound great because you're a virtuoso. And that's what this music is. And Bird and Diz and Miles, these are virtuosos. They're not average musicians. They they may be marketed like that, but they're not average musicians. No, like today, no one is playing bebop. They're playing the songs, but they're not playing what what they want to call that, which is probably it's the hardest music ever. When Beethoven did it, and when a virtuoso did it in those days, they could only do it by themselves. Theme and variations is what it is. You play the theme and then you make variations of it. Well, they could only do it by themselves, but we figured out how to do it with a group of people, which is amazing. And when you get a group of virtuosos doing it, music moves to another level. So, that's some of the things I learned by finding Bird when I was 6 years old.
Wonderful. Did you? I know you were born 1940. Bird died in '55. Did you ever have the opportunity to hear him live?
I heard him live, but I couldn't see him because I
Okay,
stand outside the club. Yeah, but I did hear him live. Yeah.
amazing.
Mhm.
I've heard. I know a few musicians who've heard him live, and they said it was a life-changing experience. Sam Noto, a great trumpet player who's lived here in Toronto for years, was on the Canton band when they did the tour with Bird and Diz. I think it was '53, and I think the tour is about 3 months. He said he heard him every night, and it was a life-changing experience. So it's quite something. Anybody that has heard him, you know.
Yeah.
Um, could you talk maybe a little bit more? Uh, could you talk about the scene in New York when you moved there? So we're talking '58 or '59,
58.
and what Charlie Parker's influence would have been on the musician shortly after his death, and how much a part of the music that was being played and what kind of influence was still there at that time
Hmm.
and in around New York.
Right. Well, it's funny because every time I went to New York as a young, I used to go even when I was in elementary school. My parents, when we would vacation, would go to New York, and we'd go to a club because I was into the music, and they were too. Um, and it was always exciting. I mean, so when I moved there, it was really exciting. All these clubs were open, and um, you could go to theaters were open, and it's just exciting. and and the older musicians would say, "Yeah, but it's not like it used to be." you know, I said, "Wow, it must have really been something," because this is something. So now, when I'm in New York, and the younger people come to New York, and they say, "Oh, this is so exciting! This and that. We can go to smoke. We can go to smoke. We can go to," and I'm find myself saying, yeah, but it's not like it used to be, So whenever you go to New York, it's going to be exciting, you know. But I guess what you're asking me is the aura of Charlie Parker was still there. It was definitely still there. And in a way, I felt the sadness, because they knew, the musicians and the people who loved the music and artists, because artists embraced him, as you know, writers, painters, because see that's a problem that we have, is that it's not a problem really. It's a problem in perception, people perceiving it. But you have musicians who make a living playing music, and then you have artists whose medium happens to be music, and that's sometimes it can be the same, but ultimately it's not. uh, so the art community was a bit in like mourning, even though, like I say, New York was exciting, um, but it's always exciting.
Right. So, like around that time, there were a lot of really great working bands. I mean, Miles had his quintet, and with Coltrane and Cannonball was on the scene.
Yeah.
Sonny Rollins was quite active at that time. Charles Mingus was doing a lot of stuff. So many people that were playing music that I mean, also moving in different directions. But I would think that Bird's influence would have been still quite prevalent at that time. No.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I would say that. But at a certain point, you realize if you're just studying one facet, because music, no one ever has ever learned music. You know, you don't learn music. You study it. You know, you work on it, and you do the best you can. You know, and so in Bird's case now, and like I say, he's a virtuoso, man. No one's gonna play like that. That's a virtuoso. That's a LeBron James. You know, all of these basketball players, but LeBron James, that's a virtuoso. You know, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, that's a virtuoso. You know, that's not normal. You know, so you go out and try to play like that. You know, you're going to fail. So what you have to do is you have to try to play like yourself. You have to find yourself as a musician. And when you get hung up in terms, you know, I'm going to be a this kind of player, or I'm going to be a this kind of player. You know, you're going down a one-way street, you know, or a dead end street, you know, um, because you have to find out what it is that you hear. Bird heard these things, and the things that Bird heard in his head, in order to play them, he had to have that kind of technique. You know, some guys hear other things. They don't have to have that kind of technique. You know, they might have to have another kind of technique, you know, but it's all in what you hear, because the art form is an art form for ears, nothing else, nothing else. It's for ears. And what's lost today, I've been finding, is that people can't hear. You know, they because they start out by reading, and once that happens, the ears get, there's a wall up there, and they, you know, and you got to bust through that wall, you know, because every great musician could hear. Every great music, I guarantee you, every great musician could hear. You know, they didn't need music. Bach didn't sit down and write all these, you know, you know, the well-tempered clavier out note by note. He sat down and played it just like we do today, and then wrote it down. You know, so it's a continuation. So when you see the art form as it's what it really is, you have a chance to find out, you know, what you can bring to the art form, rather than just copy somebody. You know, and Bird, um, you know, he knew what he had to do. Okay, Ornette Coleman. Let's talk about Ornette. For me, Ornette is the only person that really understood Bird. He understood Bird more than I wish Bird could have heard Ornette. I would have loved to known what he thought, and what he would have done, you know, because Ornette took Bird somewhere where no one had any idea. But he heard that, you know. So, but what do we hear as musicians? We have to find out what we hear. Miles kept hearing all kinds of things, you know. He kept, because that's the art form. The art form is hearing. It's not really playing, you know. It's hearing, because it's about sound. And Bird, more than any, you know, not more than any, but he showed the world what can be done, you know, when you do that kind of virtuoso work. That's virtuoso territory there. When you're trying to play those Charlie Parker tunes, that's virtuoso territory.
Absolutely. Just curious, you talked about Ornette and how he got inside Bird's music, but also was able to certainly found his own voice doing that, and I think Charlie Parker got so much inspiration from Lester Young in his early days. Also, when he first moved to New York, he worked as a dishwasher in a club where Art Tatum was playing every night, and so with some of the harmonic things that Bird did, to me it seems like Tatum was a huge influence in terms of some of the things that he developed in terms of his own playing, like creating melodies from that kind of just amazing harmonic vocabulary. And so to me, it seems like Ornette tapped into sort of the melodic aspect of Bird's playing and created his own language. I can certainly hear his influence in your playing. I hear a lot of John Coltrane's influence as well. I think you're one of the people out there that has managed to create a very strong voice with those influences, but you've always been, even from the earliest recordings I've heard, you've always been Gary Bartz, 100%. And I'm just curious, John Coltrane, I think, is someone else that was very heavily influenced by Bird, so it's interesting just to see these, how people kind of come to different aspects of one's musicality to help find their own voice. I don't know.
That's the job, I think, of a musician, is to find out what it is that only you can hear. Because I think hearing is like a fingerprint. I think everybody hears different, whether they play or not. They still hear different. One person, say, "I love that song." Another person, "I hate that song." So that's our job, is to find out what is it that we can hear that no one else has ever heard. And so that takes going inside. And what you hear today is mostly outside, because it's what somebody else has already heard. So that's why it's not necessarily recognizable. I mean, Van Gogh his paintings didn't look like Picasso's, but they were all using the same paint, and brushes and canvas and everything. So but then, see, you also have many people who have never picked up an instrument who can hear. They can hear sometimes better than the musicians that are playing. And as I teach, I say, you cannot have that happen. You cannot have the audience able to hear better. They'll come up and say, "Oh, the piano player didn't know the bridge," huh? And they've never played an instrument, but they can hear. So I tell them, man, that's like going to the doctor and you know more than the doctor. You can't have that. You can't have that happen. So we're not teaching that the art form that it is. It's an art form for ears, and we're teaching people how to read it. So we're teaching we're giving the putting the first floor in before there's a foundation. So you don't have no electricity, you don't have no water, you don't have you don't have anything. You just got a house. Yeah, it looks good, and there are people that are playing and they playing good and everything, but you know we're teaching it wrong. I've been saying it. We're teaching it backwards. You know, you if you can't hear it, 3 years old people. Man, Mozart was writing music when he was 3 years old. He could barely walk. He's just learning how to walk, and he's writing music. Because he could hear. Bird heard that. He could hear what he was playing, and then this is another thing. Listening is actually more important than playing. Listening is more important than playing. We listen 100% of the time of our lives. We play very little. And like I say, many people have never played anything, but they've listened enough to learn. Um, so these are things I learned, through Bird by studying music and by finding out how he was studying music. Because when I found out he was listening to Stravinsky, I wouldn't listen to Stravinsky, because I want to see what is it, what does he hear? What is he hearing? Because I wasn't listening to much symphonic music, um, and I began to really love that, then I began to really love music, period, rather than a type, what someone wants to call, um, yeah, a certain type of music. So, but that's because Bird was an artist. He was an artist. He wasn't just a musician. Dizzy Gillespie. They're artists. So it's a difference. You know, they don't play for weddings necessarily. You know, they don't. They don't. That's not what they do. They're trying to create. And the art form being theme and variations, what they're trying to do is each chorus they're trying to recreate the theme better than the theme, and that's hard to do. That's very hard to do.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to open it up, turn it over to Hannah. Maybe I think
Sure.
you have a question for Gary, or a number of questions. I'm not sure, but you got
Yeah,
it.
we have a couple of questions in the chat, and a number of them are related to listening. Um, Gary, could you tell us how you developed your receiving ears so that what you put out was
Mm.
your own sound, what you were hearing?
Well, I guess in my case, when I heard Charlie Parker at the age of 6, and I said to myself, I want to do that. I didn't even know what it was. I didn't even know whether it was a saxophone, a trumpet, a trombone. I didn't know, but it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard, musically. And I'd been listening to my uncle's records, but when I heard this, it like hit me. It was something that hit me. And I said, I want to do that. And so I started asking for a saxophone every Christmas and every birthday, and it took 5 years to convince them, oh, okay, we getting tired of him asking, so we'll teach him, you know. And so, but in the meantime, those 5 years, I was listening, I was studying. I didn't know I was studying, but when you listen, if you listen deep, you're studying it. So when I got my first saxophone, I knew the harmony to rhythm changes, even though I had never played it, because I heard it enough and I internalized it, and I heard it because it's listening. And so that's how the early Louis Armstrong, he didn't go to a real book, I mean, you learn by ear. That's what I'm saying. Mozart, he learned by ear. You have to listen. It's about sound. It's not about a chord. That's data. You can't teach data and expect someone to create a melodic solo by teaching data. But when you learn how to play off of the melody, which is what most great musicians do, it's going to be melodic, and you don't have to remember any chords. And so you know that's after I've got away from the question.
The question was, what do you think that, well, you answered the question, that's for certain. Do you think that you prioritize some things when you're listening deep over other things? As you
Oh,
mentioned, there's an external sound that maybe we're hearing in the world, and then there's an internal sound that you're talking about, which is a bit different.
Both.
Yeah.
Yeah. Both. You know, but I mean, sometimes, for instance, I must have listened to Moment's Notice for 2 years before I said, okay, I think I know it now. You know, and that's just by listening and looking at the chords. I was looking for that one. I had to look at the chords, you know, because that was confusing until I really understood it. And one thing that I always do that I learned at Juilliard is to analyze a piece of music. And so once I really analyzed Moment's Notice, you know, it all made sense. And then I didn't need to memorize anything. You know, I could just play it because I heard it. And one thing about John Coltrane, as many chords as he wrote, you know, and I hear a lot of songs with a lot of, you know, chords and intricate melodies. Well, he was able to play a lot of chords, but not intricate melodies. He was still melodic with his intricate chords. And nowadays, because they're not learning how to play off the melody, they don't understand how important melody is. You know, people can't go out and sing these songs that people are writing nowadays, you know. But you can sing giant steps, even though those chord changes are very hard, you know. So that's another thing. But you know, you have to be able to go inside, you know, listen from the inside. You know, you can listen from the inside, you can listen from the outside. Like I made up my mind what I wanted to sound like before I even got a saxophone. I knew what I wanted to sound like. You know, I have students ask me, well, I don't like my sound, you know. And I said, well, what do you want to sound like? You know, that's the first step. So, you know, but yeah, it's all about going inside, and it's about listening. You know. We listen all, you know, 100% of the time. It's much more important. You know, I very seldom, if I'm learning a song, I'm gonna learn it by listening first. And then when I pick up the horn, I already know it. And then it's just a technical problem, you know, of learning it on the instrument. So, but it's different kinds of ways of learning.
Yeah, a couple people in the chat have mentioned different ways of learning in their questions. You know, for instance, a question is, we need both. We need both musicians that play and the virtuosos that play working together. Do you have some thoughts about everyone fitting in the musical, everyone's place in music? That seems to be a question.
Question about Raymond Green and Ramon.
That's a question about Steph Curry.
Yeah.
That's a basketball question.
Well,
we need everyone on the team.
No, the key, even if you're not a virtuoso, and everybody's not going to be a virtuoso, that's hard. You got to work, you know. You have to listen. You have to listen. I mean, like I say, your ears should be like a satellite dish. You should hear everything. I hear the bass, I hear the drums, and I can hear them so much, I can anticipate what they're going to play. That's how you have to hear. You have to go deep. I mean, this is about hearing. The art form is hearing. That's the art form. The art form is not playing the saxophone. You know, because if I don't hear anything, I can't play anything, you know? I'm just pushing buttons and it's just nonsense, but it's what I hear. So it's what each person hears, just like a painter. What do you see? What did Van Gogh see? That's what he saw, the way he painted. That's what he saw. So the same thing. What do we hear?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Another question about how you learn is how to develop your sound by practicing other folks' music or listening to what you hear, or what do you think? You mentioned how jazz is taught today, so I wonder if you could jump in a few thoughts.
Well, like I said, as I mentioned earlier, the first step is what do you want to sound like? Now, in my case, I love Charlie Parker. That's who got me started. That's who gave me something to live for. That's who, opened up the universe for me. Um, but I like the sound of a tenor saxophone. And so I wanted to play the alto saxophone and sound like a tenor saxophone. That's what I was aiming for. And so consequently, I ended up liking tenor players who sound like alto players and alto players who sound like tenor players, you know, because that happens. But I mean, that's what I was aiming for, and some kind of way, I found a sound, and I it just happened. People started saying, "Oh, I recognize you." I wasn't even aware, but I knew what I wanted to sound like in my head because that's the key. I mean, Miles knew what he wanted to sound like. He knew what everything wanted to sound like, because it's sound. That's the art form is sound and putting sounds together that are pleasant and that sound good. you know.
Yeah, absolutely. um, you mentioned the scene in New York, when you got there, that was dependent on that rooted culture, essentially of Black American music and music that had come from the transatlantic passage, as well as the influence of immigrants on the music. And I wonder if you could just outline some of your experiences with that all coming together when you were coming up.
Well, that I don't know whether we have that much time uh, because I was coming from as most of us, I guess, that migrated to New York City. But in my case, I was coming from a segregated city. Baltimore was segregated up until I went into high school when they desegregated schools, what, in 54. And so I went into high school in 55. So I was the second graduated class that graduated after they desegregated schools. So, I mean, we had incidents like, we couldn't go, there were seven so-called black students. And that's a term, just like so-called jazz. You can't tell me what to call myself and the music that I play. And I don't look at people. I no longer look, because I know humans are humans, and there's only one race of people, and so we keep saying white and black and this and that and other, and it's just as long as we say that, we keep reinforcing that. As long as we keep saying it, we keep reinforcing it, and it's just like the word jazz. Um, I mean, that's a curse word. That's a curse word. And words bring, bad words bring negative energies. And so that's why almost all of the great musicians that I had the honor of performing with and just meeting and be around did not like that word and did not use that word. It's a word, like I say, it's a word like nigger.
Mm,
A lot of people feel that when you say jazz, That's what that means, to a lot of people. So, um, you know, and on the other end, when you keep saying white and black and white and black, that's trying to enforce that there really are more than one race of people on this planet, and there's not. Which is why I say we're losing touch with reality. Reality is losing, because if we keep saying that and we know it's not true, what does that mean? You know, what does that mean? Kids don't see that. They have to be taught that. They
Yeah.
don't know the difference. You don't put all the white dogs, and they're all the dogs. They're all, the same breed or whatever, but they're all dogs. You put all the white dogs in it's okay. They can't be with the black dog. There's no reason for that. That's unreality. You know. So anyway,
So music is music and humans are making it.
say that
So
again.
music is music and humans are making it, working together.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, it's all about segregation and separation. If I say, "Wow, it was a reggae band down there," you have an image, a certain image. You see the people in the. If I say it was a country western band, you see cowboy hats and cowboy boots. If I say it was a rock band, you'd see airmen. You'd see certain image. If it was a jazz band, you see that. It's a symphony band. You see tuxedos. You know. I mean, that's not random. That's not random. Um, but,
Would you mind if we jump to another question on the chat list?
I don't.
Okay. Um,
Well, I said yes.
well, it's up to you. um, so there's some questions about how you nurtured younger players like Roy Hargrove and some of the sessions that you did with Jackie McLean. And just wondering maybe if you want to talk about how you engaged with generations that came after you.
Well,
I mean,
music is a rare art form in that, and it really kicked in about two or 3 years ago. I did a show in Baltimore based on an album that I had done, and I started doing it every year. It's called the Blues Chronicles. It was my farewell to the record industry. Um, but we had on that show musicians all on the same stage playing together, as young as 10 up to in the 80s. And I said, wow, dancers can't do that. Many art forms can't do that, and so that's a um, that's a rare art form that can do that. And so I know I was mentored by many great musicians because you can tell when a young musician really wants to learn. You can tell, they just don't take no for an answer, and so of course you're going to help them, you know. I mean, I met Sonny Stitt when I was 14 and played um, some songs. But my dad's a story, I tell, but my dad, it's true. He sneaked the horn out, in the trunk of the car because I told him he was taking me to see Sonny Stitt, um, and told Sonny Stitt I wanted to come up and play, and he called me up, and I go up and he took me through all the keys on the blues. Now, I was 14 years old at that time, so I didn't know one key from the other. So it didn't make any difference. I followed him everywhere he went, because I'd been listening, So, what was your question?
that's great. The question that was asked was how you engaged with younger players that came up. I mean, you mentioned just having an openness to teach who wanted to learn.
Yeah, No, mentorship, music, because traditionally, see, African culture is you pass it on, the griots. You pass it on. It's an oral, oral. A lot of it is oral tradition, and so, but music is like that. Music is also like that, and so you pass it on. I mean, I see the things I see, some of the rhythms in compound rhythms I see in Bach's music, I see in Charlie Parker's music, and I see what he was studying, but I see how he put it in the context that we have today. Because I mean, they didn't have a rhythm section. If Beethoven didn't have a rhythm, I was mad if he had a rhythm section. Wow. No matter, there's no telling where we would be. We today would be even further along. Um, but no, we have to pass it on. Because no one owns it. It belongs to the world. It belongs to the universe. Sounds. I mean, Sufis think that the Big Bang happened because the sound built up to, you've seen Ella Fitzgerald break a glass with the sound of her voice. Well, they say when the sound of the universe got to a certain pitch, it exploded. That's what they believe, and that very well could happen. Yeah, I don't disbelieve it.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thought and a wonderful sentiment. I'm gonna let Kirk just jump back in with a couple more things before we got about 10 minutes.
Oh, wow.
10 minutes left, if you can believe it. Come on in, Kirk.
Okay, so there was a gentleman that wanted to get my attention to ask a question. I'm not sure whether he has access to the chat or if he's like me, a bit of a Luddite. But Harold Smith, you wanted to ask a question of Gary. Are you still with us?
I'm still with you. It's not so much as a question as it is a statement about Gary. This is a man that is, for me, he's a living John Coltrane. He's a living Charlie Parker. He's a living Ornette Coleman and all the rest because of the way he is. I hear him talking and he's being very humble. He is just unbelievable. He's the kind of person. John Coltrane said to me one time when I met him, I went running up to him, Mr. Coltrane, I'll be glad when I'm good enough to play with you. And he stopped walking, and it was like a big freight train. Everything stopped. He said, listen, don't ever say that. I said, what do you mean? He said, you're good enough to play with me right now. And that's the way Gary is. He doesn't hold back. I called him on the phone. I said, Mr. Bartz, you don't really know me. You might not remember me, but I got this band that I'm doing in Philadelphia, and I want you to come play with me. He said, who's in it? And I told him, I said, well, Calvin Hill and Fred Simmons and I think Plunky and Kimbinde and Michael Carvin I got Michael Carvin to come play the timbales with me, and Rashid Ali was playing congas. And Gary said, yeah. And one of the things that I noticed about him when we did the music, he listened and he said, so this is the feeling. He didn't talk about the notes. He didn't talk about what kind of music it was. He was talking about, this is the feeling. And I haven't heard you express so much to your audience about how you have a feeling about music and what. Listen, man, you made a statement on a record one time that has never left me, and I think everybody that plays music should take it on. Music is my sanctuary. Music is my life. You remember that? That should be the anthem for us, So yeah. You're being very humble, man, but you are such an icon, brother. And I really appreciated the fact that you don't. The last time I saw you, you were with Jamaluddin.
Right.
And at some point, we'll get back together because I still want you to play with me. I play didgeridoo now and shells, and I still want you to do something with us.
Yeah.
It'll happen. We have to wait for this pandemic to go away, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Anyway, I really want everybody to know that you are you are a living library, a living teacher. You've had an influence on people you don't even know. And so again, you are today's Charlie Parker, you are today's Ornette Coleman. You're today's John Coltrane, and don't stop.
I'm not planning on it.
So anyway, thank you, Kurt. I'm going to shut up.
Thank you for that, Harold. I could not agree more. I think Gary is one of the major voices in music today, and we're all grateful for the music that Gary, you've given us over the years, and continue to do so.
Can I say something that he mentioned? When he mentioned music is my sanctuary, and the original title to that was "Music is My Religion," and I didn't think that was poetic enough, and until a friend suggested sanctuary. But reality, music was the first religion. Music was a religion in most primitive societies because when they had their burials, when they had the funerals, when they had their births, when they had whatever ceremonies they had music and songs and drums and things like that. And this is all over the planet. Music was the first religion before organized religion. And so music is very powerful. The person who was in charge of music in the primitive societies were the next most important person, under the king or the chief or whoever was in charge, and I always joke, how far we have fallen, but this is true, music is the first religion. So something that powerful has to be controlled. And that's why music it keeps being degenerated, and that's why the true artists have a hard time, where people who, and there's nothing wrong with people being musicians, I don't have a problem with that, but there's a reason why you don't see certain people on the TV shows all the time, and you see people who you never heard of, but they're backed by big corporations, because artists are dangerous, and music, people like Prince, powerful. People like John Lennon, powerful. Michael Jackson, powerful. Elvis Presley, powerful. They're more powerful than any president in the world. They were at their height, so that's a lot of power. So, going in that direction, there's a reason why this country recognizes the the music from another country rather than to recognize the music from their own country. And for me, that is appalling. That is something that's should never happen. But anyway.
Thank you for that, Gary. We don't have a lot of time. I would like to maybe ask you if you could talk about some of your recordings. You've made some great records over the years. If people want to get a better handle on your music, maybe I have my favorite records of yours. I know what they are, but I think I'll leave it to you to maybe talk about, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 of your recordings you've done over the last 50 plus years, and then maybe also some of your favorite recordings of Charlie Parker. Maybe we think about 4 or 5 of those as well. And that might be about all we have time for. So, do you want to weigh in on that, Gary?
Um, well, as far as favorite Charlie Parker records, I wouldn't say I have a favorite. Probably my favorite is always whichever one I'm studying at the time. You know, um, I must say you mentioned Art Tatum. If you listen to Art Tatum, the way he played, and you listen to the way Charlie Parker played on Bird with strings, you'll hear Art Tatum, and that was a big influence on me. And when I recognized that, I've always loved that record, but when I realized what he was really doing, you know, um, and how melodic, I mean, Bird was always melodic. Even playing, Train was always melodic, playing all the things that he did. So, but favorite records, it's hard to say because I'm all over the place. you know.
Okay, I'm curious for some of the students that may not be as familiar with this output. Is there a starting point for?
For Charlie
Uh,
Parker records?
yes, please. Yeah.
Hmm. Well, I'll tell you the first one that I remember was called Red Cross. And years later, I recorded that with Jackie McLean. We did record that. Um, you can go there. You can go to one of my favorites that I wore this out trying to transcribe it when I was in high school. In the Still of the Night, that's the one with the voices, and Gil Evans did the arrangements. Old Folks is on the other side. Then Au Revoir, that's another one. Um, Coco was always, I stayed away from until, for many years I stayed away from it. But I did learn Cherokee because he was always working on that. He kind of developed his whole way of thinking by working on Cherokee because I've studied all of his going back as far back as when he was even in just out of high school, and I hear some of the same ideas back then that he eventually used on the master tape of Coco. But you know, I don't think I have a favorite. I can't say I have a favorite.
That's no, that's definitely helpful. Speaking of Cherokee, the recording Kansas City, I think it was like 42. You've heard those, right? With just guitar. Yeah, and it's obvious listening to those recordings that the seed is already sown. In terms of that was definitely a forerunner to Coco, which I think was five
Yeah.
or 6 years later. Now we're pretty much out of time, but can you talk about a few of your recordings that people might be interested in checking out?
Mm. That's so hard.
Do you
Uh,
want? I mean, I'm happy to chime in here because I'm a huge fan, and
I don't have a favorite, because that's like asking who is your favorite kid, I don't have a favorite. I mean, I hope you like all of them or any one of them because they each, you know what happened with me. I found out Beethoven um, would write a symphony which was very dark, like Eroica, about war and Napoleon and all of that. And then he would follow that with a light piece, like the Pastoral or something. Well, I started doing that in my, on my recordings. I would, so Libra, which is my first recording, was more or less my introduction. So it was a more of a light, recording. Then I followed that with Another Earth, which was more serious, more darker one, and so I did that. So but as far as which one, I don't know. I think maybe the Blues Chronicles. That's one of my favorites because I knew that I was not going to sign with another major record label. That was my farewell to the record industry because I had had it. Yeah. Yeah.
And Blues Chronicles was mid '90s, was it? Late '90s?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think it's 5.
All those records before that, There Goes Neighborhood is great. The Red and Orange Poems, fantastic recordings. West 42nd, Shadows. So you've made a series of great records with just amazing musicians: Kenny Barron, Mulgrew,
Yeah.
John Hicks. You know, so those seem to be a lot of long associations you've had with those musicians. That
Yeah.
those records were really great as well. So.
I'll tell you a record. It's not my record, but it's a record of McCoy Tyners that, for me, this particular record shows McCoy's band. This was a working band. I was working with McCoy at the time, Freddie Waits and Herbie Lewis. And so that's the working band. And he added for that session, um, oh, he added a string section, and Andrew White, who just passed away, was and but when you listen, it's called Cosmos. That is how we played in the clubs, and the record labels didn't understand what we were doing. They didn't understand it because they were used to a band coming in and playing the head and then playing some choruses and trading fours or doing some. But we were like just an organic band, and we just went in and started playing. He told us what to do when it come, when the other horns come in, and they sat on it for about 5 to 10 years, but I went back and listened to it, and that's an amazing record. Um, I know that's not what you were asking me, but
No, it's great. It's great. So people can check out your music. One final thing, and I think we're going to have to close things down. There's a new tribute record to Charlie Parker with yourself, Bobby Watson, Vincent Herring, Dave Krakowski, Carl Allen. That's out, right? That's been out for maybe 6 months or so. I haven't heard it, but
yeah, it's been out for a while. Yeah.
And so that's something else. Is that Celebrating Bird? I don't recall the title of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Celebrating Bird. So that's something that other people can check out. Gary, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join us. This has just been fantastic. It's so great to hear you, talk about music and Charlie Parker and also your own career. And so we're thrilled you could join us. And I'd like to thank you on behalf of Humber and all the folks here this afternoon. So it's really been great.
Sorry, I can't answer all these questions. I see a lot of questions. I would love to answer them. But I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Thank you.